Good morning. It's May 31st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with North Korea's space launch vehicle this morning. The regime launched what appears to be the much speculated upon military reconnaissance satellite. The launch is the first of its kind in 7 years. And following the launch, Seoul's top office convened a meeting on the security situation where it will decide whether a National Security Council meeting is required. The South Korean delegation that visited the Fukushima nuclear power plant will brief the South Korean public on their trip to assess if stored wastewater is safe to be released into the ocean. Our top story this morning, North Korea launched what it claims to be a space launch vehicle southward just a few hours ago, and also just a day after the regime declared plans to do so. For more on this developing story, we have our Lee Si-hoo on the line. Si-hoo, what do we know about the launch so far?
Dami, as you said, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said they detected the launch of what the North claims to be a space launch vehicle from Dongchangmi village in Gyeongbuk-do province in western North Korea at 6:29 this morning. It said that the projectile flew over the sea to the west of Baekneungdo Island in Incheon, South Korea, before vanishing off the radar. That is, before reaching what they say is the expected drop point. Now, this comes after North Korea earlier this week notified the International Maritime Organization that it would be launching a satellite between May 31st and June 11th. The regime pointed out that the first separation point of the rocket would be in the sea far west of Gunsan in South Korea's Jeollabuk-do province. It also said that the dropping point of the fairing or the equipment used to protect the satellite in the earlier phase of the launch would be in the sea far west of Jeju Island. Then the dropping point of the rocket itself is said to be in the sea east of Luzon Island in the Philippines. That notification was met with international criticism, including from the U.S. Department of State, which said the launch would be a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions banning any launch using ballistic missile technology. North Korea last launched a projectile of this kind in 2016, which is said also had a satellite attached. North Korea has been relatively quiet in terms of launches since the firing of what the regime called a Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile on April 13. Meanwhile, Reuters has raised the possibility of the recent projectile being a ballistic missile.
Sure, Si-hoo. And we also hear from the JCS that South Korea's military is in a full preparation mode and is in close cooperation with the United States. Then how else are South Korea and other countries reacting to the firing?
Well, Dami, the office of President Yoon Suk-yeol called a security meeting Wednesday to discuss the launch with the possibility of a National Security Council meeting convening depending on the need. There was an evacuation alert shortly after launch for the island of Baekneungdo, which was lifted a little after 8 a.m. in South Korea. There was also an emergency warning sent out to residents in Seoul City, urging people to take shelter, but the Interior Ministry later clarified that the warning was sent in error. As for Japan, according to an NHK report, the Japanese government issued an alert to the residents of Okinawa shortly after the launch, urging residents to take shelter inside a building or underground. The warning was lifted around 30 minutes later after the Japan Coast Guard said the missile was believed to have splashed down. That's all I have for now, and I'll be back with more updates in a later newscast. Back to you, Dami.
Thank you, Si-hoo. Do keep us posted. Now, moving on, then, why is there so much attention on the North space launch vehicle, and why at this time of the year? Let's turn to our Lee Kyung-in for details.
Launching its first reconnaissance satellite is key to North Korea's 5-year military advancement plan rolled out in 2021 with the aim of having it ready by April this year. Sending a satellite into orbit requires a long-range space rocket. While space development is an open race for many countries, this is not the case for North Korea. Because the required rocket involves long-range missile technology and the regime is banned from using it under UN Security Council resolutions, regardless of the purpose. Despite warnings from the international community, North Korea has been accelerating its militarization of space. Earlier in May, leader Kim Jong-un inspected the satellite and gave the go-ahead for quote, future action plan. with the launch date finalized to be between May 31st and June 11th. Affecting the timing, the weather factors to avoid seasonal monsoon rains or typhoons, but also the North's competitive spirit against the South.
North Korea desperately wants to be ahead of South Korea when it comes to satellite launch capability. And South Korea just put a satellite, 7 of them in fact, into orbit about a week ago.
But at the core of Pyongyang's planning is the military component. Since 1998, North Korea has attempted 6 satellite launches. Just 2 entered orbit, only to fail to communicate with the ground. If this one succeeds, the regime could ramp up its monitoring and precision strike capability against South Korea and the U.S. But experts say there's only so much it could do with that one satellite in its early stage of development.
The satellite seems to be capable of creating only low-resolution images, which will be difficult to identify in the case of rain or darkness. The regime also lacks expertise and infrastructure to analyze the received data.
Plus, more than one satellite is needed to create a comprehensive image of a target. That said, experts say this launch could pave the way for more to come, at which point the North could expand its data analysis and advance the capability of its satellites. Young-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea is hosting an anti-proliferation maritime exercise involving the U.S., Japan, and Australia on Jeju Island on Wednesday, but on a smaller scale due to the weather. It's part of the Proliferation Security Initiative, or PSI forum that kicked off on Tuesday, aimed at stopping the spread of weapons of mass destruction. According to the Defense Ministry, the exercise involves a maritime interception and seizure operations. This includes operating vessels on a command post exercise using computer simulations. But the procedures have been simplified, with only the South Korean Navy and Coast Guard ships to anchor at Jeju Civil Military Complex Port for other training such as boardings and inspections. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women released a report on Tuesday, which pointed out that North Korean women who defect to China face being trafficked and forced into marriage. Lee Seung-jae with more on this report.
The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women released a report on Tuesday after a review of women's rights in China. The report pointed out the human rights violations that North Korean women refugees face, including human trafficking and forced marriages. The UN organization called on China to not repatriate any North Korean refugees who defect from the North, as North Korean women are being deprived of their rights to give birth because children born in China cannot register their birth locally without exposing the mother to the risk of being deported to North Korea. It also called for North Korean women and girls who have been victims of human trafficking to be given basic social services, such as temporary residence permits, medical and education services, alternative income opportunities, and rehabilitation programs without being punished for violating immigration laws. In response to the report, China did not acknowledge the issue of human rights violations, stating that most of the North Korean women who come to China come to make money, and it's difficult to consider that as human trafficking. The United Nations defines human trafficking as not only the buying and selling of people as goods, but also the act of taking people under the pretext of employment and preventing them from moving freely by exploiting their vulnerable position. The latest CEDAW report marks the first time the UN organization publicized the human rights issue of North Korean refugee women through a human rights review targeting China and not North Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The South Korean government will announce the results of last week's on-site inspection of the Fukushima nuclear power plant on Wednesday. The head of the 21-member inspection team, which visited the site, Yoo Guk-hee, will give details of their findings in a press conference, which will be followed by a question and answer session. The team of experts returned to South Korea on Friday after a 6-day visit to the Fukushima nuclear power plant, which included a 2-day on-site inspection. The South Korean team of experts that visited the Fukushima nuclear power plant last week is set to hold a briefing in the coming hour to provide details of the assessment of the safety of the stored wastewater before it gets released into the Pacific Ocean. While we await further results, let's turn to Mr. Sean Burney. He's a senior nuclear specialist at Greenpeace East Asia. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sean. The South Korean delegation to the Fukushima nuclear power plant was able to see wastewater-related facilities with their own eyes, they say. How meaningful or successful do you think their trip was? I mean, what do you think will be included in the upcoming briefing?
Well, let's wait to see exactly what they explain at their press conference this morning. However, the reality is that spending a couple of days in Fukushima being briefed by TEPCO, you're not going to learn very much. And also in terms of what you're really investigating, we have to remain really skeptical that the scientists as part of this panel investigation are going to achieve very much. The problem is that Tokyo Electric, the owners of the nuclear plant themselves, really don't know what's going on at the Fukushima Daiichi plant. There are some fundamental issues here that, unfortunately, the South Korean panel is not really addressing. One of which is a comprehensive environmental assessment. That's not been done either by Tokyo Electric, by the Japanese government, by the IEA, and it's not part of the South Korean government's panel's demand. That's fundamentally important to understand what will be the long-term impacts of these radioactive discharges.
Right. Let's see how much depth and clarity the report will have in the coming hour. Now, in the meantime, the IAEA is also in Fukushima today, this week, in fact, to inspect the wastewater there. How will their visit be different from the South Korean delegations? I mean, does the IAEA's visit mean Japan is soon to release contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean?
It's a very good question. The IEA, since 2015, have effectively been encouraging Japan to actually begin the dumping of nuclear waste into the Pacific. That's because the IEA supports nuclear power and has done since it was established in the 1950s and has really always been in favor of nuclear discharging from nuclear plants. So although the IEA is saying it's going to be upholding international standards, those standards are drafted to allow the nuclear industry to dump nuclear waste, to discharge nuclear waste. So it's a very good question. The IEA's report is almost certainly timed to give a sort of green light to the Japanese government. So we can expect that when the IEA's report comes out, if it's the end of June, the radioactive discharges could begin as early as July.
Right, and also talks on seafood exposed to radioactivity have to be discussed. Right now, President Yoon Suk-yeol has said that those seafood will not be allowed into the country, but there are still lingering concerns that Japan's release of the wastewater may eventually mean affected seafood gets imported into the country. Sean, is that so? I mean, what's your take on these worries?
So the World Trade Organization the appellate court held in support of Korea's position in 2019. That was a very unexpected but important ruling. That's not going to be overturned. What will have to happen is the Japanese government will continue to put pressure on the Korean government, and the Korean government at some point may have to bend to that Japanese pressure. That's a decision for, of course, the Korean government. And it's really important. The victims here are the fishing communities, both in Korea, but especially in Japan. And so this is a political game being played with people's lives, with their businesses. Actually, the only clear decision that should be taken is that these discharges should not happen. They're unlawful and unsafe.
Right. We are actually on the verge of seeing Japan actually release the water, though. But let's see how the report from the South Korean delegation and also another report from the IAEA turned out to be.
Thank you so much.
All right, Sean, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Amid the boom in artificial intelligence, U.S. chipmaker Nvidia joins the $1 trillion club. Nvidia, the largest chipmaker for AI technology, reached $1 trillion in valuation on Tuesday morning after its shares rose 25%. The prices have been rising since May 24th, after the company announced second quarter revenue forecasts that were 50% higher than investors' expectations. According to Bloomberg, Nvidia becomes the first chipmaker to reach the milestone and only the 9th company to do so. Now, other companies with trillion-dollar valuations include Meta, Amazon, and Alphabet, Google's parent company. The successful third launch of South Korea's very own Nuri space rocket last week has opened up a new space era for South Korea. Not only has it cemented the country's space power, but it's also opened up opportunities in the lucrative aerospace industry. Our Shin Ha-young reports.
Behind the successful launch of Nuri is the participation of Hanwha Aerospace, which became the first private company to take part in the project. The involvement comes as space industries in other countries are ready to enter the so-called new space era, led by private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin.
The country is now transferring technology to the private sector and letting it supervise the integration of such launch vehicles. This is because when the domestic industry weakens, it is difficult for even the national-led space development to progress.
3 more launches of the Nuri rocket will be carried out between now and 2027, with Hanwha Aerospace taking charge. Throughout the process, private firms will take on the responsibility of manufacturing the Korean space launch vehicles while aiming to improve their manufacturing skills. Following the third launch of Nuri, South Korea's space industry as well as other industries are expected to see growth.
The aerospace industry encompasses all industries related to space exploration, such as the construction and operation of launch vehicles and satellites, as well as the development and supply of satellite services, therefore having significant added economic value.
As seen in the war in Ukraine, in emergency situations, satellite communication, such as that provided by SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet service, is important. In fact, the South Korean government is planning to launch 80 satellites by 2030. With increasing demand for satellites, semiconductor and communication service sectors are expected to grow, along with advancements in technologies for monitoring climate and observing terrain. Based on a forecast of the global market reaching $1 trillion by 2040, the government hopes to expand South Korea's share in the global space market to 10% by 2045. Starting this year, the government is planning to invest 2 trillion won, or roughly $1.5 billion, in developing a next-generation launch vehicle that is even more advanced than Nuri. It'll be used to launch a lunar lander in 2032. The Yoon administration is also working on establishing a National Aeronautics Administration, or a Korean version of NASA, in order to lead the country's space economy. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Russia, where drone attacks on Tuesday local time hit buildings in the capital, Moscow. Now, according to reports, the attacks injured 2 people and damaged at least 3 residential buildings. Russia has blamed Ukraine for the strikes. President Vladimir Putin said the attack was an attempt by Ukraine to frighten Russians. He added that it is a clear sign of terrorist activity. But Ukraine has denied any involvement. For its part, Ukraine has been hit by 17 airstrikes this month, including one on the capital of Kyiv on Monday, which killed at least 1 person. We turn over to the United States now, where disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes has begun her 11-year prison sentence. Holmes on Tuesday local time entered a federal Texas prison after her request to remain free on bail while appealing her conviction was rejected. The 39-year-old was convicted on 4 felony counts of fraud and conspiracy in January last year. This because she falsely claimed her company had technology capable of detecting conditions such as diabetes using just a few drops of blood. The hype saw Theranos raise billions in funding from investors. But the technology never worked, and the Silicon Valley-based company closed its doors in 2018. Earlier this month, a U.S. judge also ordered that Holmes and her ex-partner Ramesh Balwani pay $452 million to the victims. Now shifting to the tech space, dozens of AI experts and tech leaders, including the heads of OpenAI and Google DeepMind, have warned that artificial intelligence could lead to humanity's extinction. According to a statement published by the Center for AI Safety on Tuesday, the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority and needs to be reduced. The statement also outlined ways that AI could threaten humanity, including weaponizing AI to make chemical weapons and destabilizing society through generated misinformation. But other experts say fears of extinction due to AI are overblown and unrealistic. And finally, the world's only known white panda has been caught on camera. The bear was spotted in China's Sichuan province in the Ulong National Nature Reserve. Footage shows the bear approaching a calm mother panda and her cub, whom experts believe may be part of its family. The white panda was first discovered in April 2019. Experts have concluded that it is an albino due to its red eyes and lack of black spots.
Good morning. It looks to be a repeat of yesterday's weather conditions under brighter skies. Western parts of the country will see another big hike in afternoon highs, while East Coast regions will see a breezier afternoon again, but Southeast regions including Daegu should notice warmer highs compared to yesterday. Skies will get sunnier. Other than the capital region, most parts will be under lots of sunshine, boosting UV rays to very high levels during the day. Meanwhile, Jeju Island is forecast to see 5 to 20 millimeters of more rain into this afternoon, with a high of 22 degrees Celsius. And Gwangju and Seoul will be topping out at 28 degrees. Now, the air quality will be normal to good nationwide all day today. Now, those in the south need to brace for another band of rain that's in the forecast from Jeju and the south coast tomorrow morning, which will expand to the rest of the southern regions by the afternoon and continue into Friday morning. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.
In what sort of environments do new enterprises typically flourish and succeed? It should be a place that helps an enterprise to grow, where an enterprise can realize its unlimited potential with talented human resources, where the success of a business is guaranteed. It is the Chungbuk Free Economic Zone.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. World Expo 2030, Busan, Korea.
Join Ashley for a treat for the eyes and ears. It's time to watch the radio. You're watching Radio Clock. You're watching Arirang.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. Animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K Animation, befriending children all over the world.
We're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's May 31st here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dain-hong.
Happy last day of May.
It's the last day of May.
Yeah, I just noticed.
And Park Bi-hun.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, we'll start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Did you sell your Samsung Electronics shares? Well, many individual investors did as soon as stock prices surpassed $53. Finance and investment experts found that Samsung Electronics stocks were the #1 stock sold this month. With the company seeing a sudden rebound, many individual investors went on social media to share how they were upset that they sold it when prices were lower. Meanwhile, overseas investors bought $7.4 billion worth of Samsung stocks. Next up, great news for households in Finland. Electricity prices in the Scandinavian country dropped below zero on Sunday. It's the second time that this happened since last Wednesday, and the prices became negative due to an unexpected overflow of renewable energy and Finns cutting back on energy use. Lastly, more young Americans are choosing to get blue-collar jobs instead of going to college. The U.S. Department of Labor recently conducted a survey on high school graduates aged 16 to 24. It turned out only 62% of them decided to go to college this year. Now, this was a drop compared to before the pandemic in 2019, when over 66% decided to take an academic career path. Now, we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. Instead of getting a college degree, the number of young people working at restaurants and theme parks in the States has doubled. The Wall Street Journal analyzed this to be due to higher minimum wages for workers in this industry. In just 4 years, wages went up by 30%. Meanwhile, the manufacturing and logistics industry is still left short-handed. Now, if we expand the feed to the studio, what would you guys do if you could go back in time? Would you still choose to go to college or get a blue-collar job?
That's a very good question, but I think it really depends where I want to end up with my career. If I want to start early, start making money at an early age, I would definitely choose a blue-collar job. But if I want to study several more years to have a higher education, to have a more specific job, then I'll hold back and then go to college. But with me, I did start quite early with a blue-collar job and then went back to studying. And one upside of jumping into the jungle at an early age is that you acquire all the needed experience and knowledge to really survive better and smarter in this really competitive world like Seoul or anywhere else.
Like this actual jungle. I love that expression you used. Now, what about you, Cheska? And could you tell us how many young people in Korea actually have blue-collar jobs then?
You know, it's a very interesting question because we know that South Korea is a very academically, rigorous country.
Yes, we are.
So I don't think a lot of people end up having blue-collar, but they start off, a lot of my friends including, start off with a blue-collar job to try to figure out which career path they want to take. I definitely had more people in the States who started or continued the blue-collar job, even my friends. But one interesting trend that I've noticed is I have an acquaintance and she started as a cleaning profession, and then she started a corporation where she expanded into her own company. So she still continues the custodial and the cleaning job, but now she owns a company. So I would say it's like a sky blue collar job.
A sky blue collar job. I love it. I love it.
Perfect outfit for today's topic.
I hope we made a new collar category for people out there.
Yeah, like a light blue sky.
Exactly, a sky blue one for sure. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. We're now going to move on to our main discussion topic. And May 31st is when countries around the world come together to celebrate World No Tobacco Day. Is South Korea going in the right direction? Take a look at the screen to find out. Once you start, it's hard to quit. That's what most smokers say because for years they've been trying to quit but can't because of how addictive it is. Governments and health organizations around the world make efforts to try to stop people from starting in the first place. It seems to have worked here in Korea as we've seen smoking rates in the country go down, especially among those in their 20s and 30s. Back in 2019, roughly 1 out of 4 Koreans in this age group smoked. This dropped to 1 out of 5 in 2021. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. What do millennials Gen Z think about smoking? 2. How is their perception different from other generations? 3. How are governments trying to encourage more people to quit or never start smoking? Are these policies effective? All right, today is World No Tobacco Day, and this year the World Health Organization and other public health authorities have decided to set the theme as "We need food, not tobacco." And this is to raise awareness and promote tobacco farmers harvesting sustainable crops instead of tobacco. And in light of this day, we're going to be talking about Korea's smoking culture and how millennials and Gen Z view it. So what better way to find out than asking our Gen M0 panelists, are you guys smokers, and what do you think about smoking in general?
I think today I represent the non-smokers in South Korea. So as a representative of the non-smoking party, I would like to say a day like today is definitely something that I very much appreciate. And for me, the reason for non-smoking is, it might seem very odd, but reasonable. I really don't trust myself. I really don't. And I'm being absolutely serious because who knows what their one cig or one puff could lead to countless more that I probably can't even control. So that's why I never started and probably won't start ever. But what I think is really important when it comes to smoking is what I call peer pressure and colleague pressure.
For sure.
Because, I mean, Ki-hoon, you could relate, but in a lot of South Korean corporation, pretty much every employee or your senior smoke.
They do.
So when they go out to have a sick time or like a free time, I even felt very pressured if I'm missing out on something, or why am I not getting the free time that they get to get every time they go out for a puff? And you know, you kind of want to mingle with your colleagues. So
for sure.
That kind of put a pressure on some people and some of my MZ friends to actually continue smoking.
But I just have to tell Cheska, you haven't missed out on anything.
Thank God.
I've been there, done that, gone for a lot of ciggy breaks with my co-workers and seniors. They talk about nothing.
Really?
They talk about their wives, how stressful life is, nothing work-related or serious. It was very casual, so you didn't miss out on
Ironically,
anything.
that makes me so happy.
Really, does it now? Does it relieve you a little bit?
Because as a non-smoker, it's a lot of pressure.
It is.
You feel like you're missing out on some important
That's
you
true.
know, meetings or like something they're talking about.
And that's why a lot of non-smokers at work actually decide to smoke, because they want to join that, you know, puff time at work.
Exactly.
But you've been there, done that. So tell us more.
I was a smoker for 10 years, but I've quit, and it's been almost 6 years now, so I can proudly say that I'm a non-smoker now.
That's
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I did it. But, you know, there's a saying among people who quit that they're not literally quitting for good. It's just suppressing, holding back, restraining themselves from having the next one that could, you know, lead to another one. So it's like just refraining them from smoking for the rest of their lives. So that's how addictive smoking can get. But as a person who's experienced both, I think once you, it's easy. It's not easy quitting. It's very hard. But once you do quit, your life really changes a lot from your health, your expenses, mental state, and even the people you spend time with. You know, that changes a lot. So
and you smell better. Like
like how I smell now.
Yes, you definitely smell better.
Yeah. So you don't really want to go back because there's so much to lose and nothing to gain except coughing, bad breath.
That was a good one.
And as you mentioned, Q, and I hear it's incredibly hard to quit once you start, but the Korean government and health officials have been trying their best to get smokers to stop. So why don't we walk through some policies that are currently in place right now and actually take a look at how effective they are?
Absolutely. The Korean government has definitely been active in trying to dissuade the public from smoking, and the number of smoking rate has actually been on decline since 2009, and over the 10 years went from about 30% to a little less than 20, which is not a lot, but it is still on the decline. And smoking ban policies have also become a lot more rigorous by raising the prices on the so-called sin tax and expansion of non-smoking areas with penalties and fine, and also regulations on cigarette price packaging, smoking warning statements, and, you know, having to mark carcinogens on the packet. So the government is definitely trying, but I'm also curious as to how much this actually had the effect on dissuading the public, because as we know, e-cig has become incredibly popular among young people, and that I think is another problem that the government needs to tackle.
Right, so officials have been trying their best to get people to not smoke, but they still need more regulations on the e-cigarettes front, because we're seeing more of that on the streets nowadays. What about you, Kyun? Would you like to add on to how effective our policies are so far?
Yeah, like in Korea, non-smoking areas have exponentially increased, and smoke-free zones in indoor public public facilities in Seoul alone accounted for a staggering 92.8% at the end of last year.
Wow.
And not just that, even in outdoor areas like bus stops, around subway stations, taxi stands, and even in parks, and 19,000 other places have been designated as smoke-free zones. Not to mention inside apartments as well, like newly built apartments. But I think on the other hand, this kind of like one-way policy going against like smokers, it takes away the rights of the smokers. And because there are less and less places to smoke. So I think one way to find the middle ground is to perhaps make a bit more smoking areas to give smokers a bit more freedom and not to give them the guilt trip of smoking, because it's a choice, right?
Exactly, and we call it sin tax too. It's as if it's a sin, but also we mentioned during our rehearsal before the show, that this brings up social conflict, right?
Absolutely.
Because if there's no more smoking areas, a lot of smokers would, as you mentioned, go to the alleyways and smoke, which would definitely cause a lot of people to be angry at smokers when they're just, you know, doing a choice that they made.
Exactly, just like drinking.
Exactly.
Now, and yet, if I may add, I have a lot of friends who do smoke, so I know how hard it is to quit smoking. So I agree with Kyun that guilt trip is not an option. But I also believe that there should be more infrastructures in the non-smoking areas, like trash cans designated for cigarettes, or even like a glass block or ventilators that suck up the smoke, because the environmental effect of the cigarette trash clogging up the sewers and the smoke in the air zone causes a tremendous amount of problems.
It does.
So just a guilt trip isn't going to solve all the problems, I think, out there.
For sure. And we have been seeing the number of people smoking go down year by year, though. So in other words, maybe our anti-smoking policies are quite effective, but a better way to find out whether this is the case is to compare it with other countries. So Cheska, could you first tell us what countries around the world are doing to bring smoking levels down?
Yes, and I think today we have the best representation of the panelists.
Why so?
Because the two top countries are Australia. And the Kiwis.
Really, New Zealand?
Yes.
They are.
Yeah. So starting with the Australia levies the highest tax on cigarettes. So roughly about $20 to $25 just on the tax. And they also have a very rigorous policy. And the Kiwis have declared smoke-free nation by 2025. Wow. Yes, so knock on wood, I do hope it happens. And other countries such as the UK, Canada and Ireland are at the forefront of eradicating smoking. One interesting thing I noticed was that Canada prohibits smoking when minors are present, which I think is very, very important.
That's a great policy.
Because as you know, young people pick up smoking from adults,
for sure,
parents, and even sometimes teachers.
Yes, sometimes teachers, for sure.
Are you looking at me?
All right, Q, would you like to add on to this list?
Yeah, in Japan, Japan's known for its high smoking rate. They pay a lot of attention to smokers while making these kind of policies. So by designating more smoking areas, separating smoking areas between floors, and even implementing time-restricted smoking. So there's like a set time where they can smoke and when they cannot smoke. And as a result, social conflicts regarding this matter has decreased, and it's really low in Japan. So I think maybe South Korea can kind of learn from Japan as well in this sense.
And what I was very fascinated, recently I went on a trip to Osaka in Japan, and what really fascinated me was smokers had their own portable ashtrays.
I love that.
Yeah, so I thought that was... It was really incredible to see. Smoking etiquette there was actually quite nice, because they didn't want to, give any, harm or, affect other people, especially non-smokers, because as you mentioned, the environmental costs are quite high, and I think smokers there were very knowledgeable about that, which is why they had their own portable ashtrays.
I really love that.
It's a very good idea. And speaking of Australia, we're going to include a health promotion expert who specializes in analyzing tobacco control. She's actually a researcher from Melbourne, so we'll include her in our talks right after this. Australia has one of the world's strictest regulations against smokers, and to find out more on how the government tries to bring down the number of smokers and encourage people to quit, we're going to include an associate professor from Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. It's Professor Michelle Duncan-Ellis, who also sits on the Australian Council of Smoking and Health. Welcome, Professor Duncan-Ellis.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so as we briefly mentioned before, Australia seems to be one of the strictest countries against smoking. Tell us, what is the general public's perception towards smokers and smoking?
Yeah, we've done a really good job over the last few decades at really denormalizing smoking. So this is an act that causes great harm. It kills people. So, you know, the general public perception of it is this is something that, you know, we should be doing more to combat, while also providing support to people who, you know, choose to continue smoking but might find it difficult to quit. So, you know, the vast majority of people who are smoking in Australia really do want to quit, but they're addicted, and so they just need that extra support.
I see.
And we're very excited to talk about Australia because we have panelists from Aussie and Kiwi right here. So what are some of the anti-smoking policies the government has been implementing in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, so our government has adopted quite a comprehensive approach to tobacco control. So, you know, we acknowledge that it isn't just one thing that is going to help people quit smoking or drive smoking rates down. It's going to be a variety of things. So, you know, you mentioned our tobacco excise. So, you know, for a packet of cigarettes in Australia, it costs 50 Australian dollars, which is 42,000 South Korean won. So that is for one packet of cigarettes. So, you know, it's very unaffordable. So that has really driven down smoking prevalence rates. On top of that, we have things like plain packaging. So these products are not colourful. They are not designed to be appealing. They have to be in plain packaging. The packaging also has warning labels on it, and not just warning labels telling people that these products are harmful, but really graphic images of what smoking does to your body. So, you know, really yucky lungs and teeth and all of that sort of stuff. And then on top of that as well, we've got mass media campaigns. So we've got ads that go out to the public, informing them of how harmful these products are. We've got smoke-free areas, so making sure that, you know, there are areas for people to smoke, but that these are away from other areas where, you know, reduces the risk of secondhand smoking. So they're just sort of some of the policies that we've got in place. And our government has recently announced, you know, additional reforms to really close any loopholes that the tobacco industry is sort of taking advantage of.
Yeah, Professor, thinking back, I remember how expensive the cigarettes were in Sydney, and of course the graphics as well. So I used to, you know, draw over it just to cover it up, thinking that it's not going to happen to me. But, you know, out of all the policies that you mentioned, which do you think is the most effective?
Well, the ones that have been found to be the most effective, again, it's a comprehensive approach. So there isn't any one particular one that I would say do this and don't do anything else. But what we know from the research is that it's the tax increases, it's the smoke-free spaces, and it's the mass media campaigns and the plain packaging. So those sort of four key policies are the ones that have really driven down prevalence rates. Because not only do these policies sort of make smoking more expensive, for example, but it also does what I sort of talked about earlier around denormalizing this behaviour, right? So fewer people are smoking. We're not seeing it around. We've got no kids or fewer kids smoking. And so then people, you know, it's not a behaviour that people want to engage in.
And, you know, in the first part of our discussion, we mentioned this, that a lot of South Koreans aren't smoking compared to before, but there is a very central issue to this still. It's the fact that teens are getting their hands on e-cigarettes. So what do you think Korea needs to do to better bring these smoking rates down, especially amongst youngsters?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it's something that we're battling in Australia at the moment. So Australia is one of the few countries, or the only country in the world, to have adopted sort of a prescription model for e-cigarettes. So, you know, if you are a smoker who wants to use these products to quit smoking, you can go to your doctor and get a prescription and then go to a chemist to fill that prescription. Unfortunately, we haven't done a very good job of closing the retailers. So our government has just announced new reforms to completely ban the sale of these products outside of the prescription model. Because just like you guys, we are seeing increases in kids using these products. Yes. They're going to the store, they're underage, they are still being sold these products. And so our government has planned to implement a complete ban on these products unless you get them from your pharmacy.
Wow, that's a very good policy, and I hope South Korea does look into that as well. Thank you so much, Professor Jong-Ellis. It was a pleasure to have you here on our show today.
Thank you so much.
No worries. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Professor.
All right, and we're now going to hear from our global viewers and what they had to say on today's discussion topic. So if you take a look at the screen, you'll find out what 3 of them had to say. Eric Strack said, I do not smoke. I enjoyed smoking occasionally in my early 20s and smoking in Japan, which was 25 years ago. My wife found the smoke annoying, so I changed my mind. Wow, what a romantic.
Happy wife, happy
exactly.
life.
Now, Nara Property said, from my point of view, the government should control and strengthen the smoking regulations in public places, especially in front of young people or schools. And Scratchnigger's cat playing with the Tesseract. Now, yes, I smoke. I personally think smoking laws should be relaxed. Taking away people's choice is a poor form of governance. These are all very good points. And as we mentioned with our talks with Professor Jong-Ellis, smoking definitely has evolved as well. We're seeing more people use e-cigarettes. So Ki-hoon, as a person who's smoked before, could you tell us what the difference...
Don't give me the guilt trap.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
I feel so guilty.
Could you please compare the two? How different is it from actual cigarettes?
No, I have tried e-cigarettes before, obviously, and it seems less harmful on the outside, but you have to know that it still does contain nicotine, which is the substance that gets you addicted, and it obviously has adverse effects on the brain, especially among young adults. And I think that there are so many online commercials that promote these kind of cigarettes with this, cool, different taste, the smell. It's like choosing different ice cream flavors for kids. So I think it's really important to note that these e-cigarettes are not completely risk-free and can have long-term health side effects.
Then in light of World No Tobacco Day, let's wrap up with words of advice or concern to smokers out there, starting with Cheska.
I would say go with the slogan, don't start what you can't stop.
That's really nice.
I mean, we all know the health benefits of quitting, so I don't want to labor on that. But what I've learned from many of my smoker friends is they all start with this one sentence. Once upon a time, it started with that one cig. It really did.
It did.
It did.
It did. For me.
They don't give a lot of thought into the one cig and say, you know what, I will just have this one puff and then just quit. But that doesn't happen very easily. So be very careful of what you start. And also, if you have friends that are not on board with what you're doing or try to have a better life, quit them too. Surround yourself with people who make you feel safe.
Strong words.
Strong words. Strong words of advice right there. What about you, Ki-hoon?
Look, nobody wants to age and get sick at the same times. And if unfortunately, smoking enhances that. So if living a healthy life 10 years down the track is one of your goals, quit now. Because there are so many better things, happier things in life, like watching news, Jen. So
all right. And
that's what I'm doing.
All right. And that's a very good way to end off here. We'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainha.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children.